Hi, I'm the old school fish guy, sometimes called Don. I want to talk to you today about Corydoras. I've had several people commenting about Corydoras recently. I've done videos on Corydoras. I've mentioned the Corydoras. That's probably because Corydoras were my first love in tropical fish keeping from way back when I was just a wee little boy in my daddy's fish tank. It was the only fish I really loved from everything he started with, which was just a cheap community tank back in the 60s. A 10-gallon that he got as a kid, and that was all he cared about. So today I thought I'd just talk more about Corydoras. The first thing I'm going to talk about, and some of this stuff I've talked about before, but I'm going to say it again, Substrate. When I was a young man, when I was a little boy, when I was a young man, I had 30 tanks of Corydoras all breeding. And this is back when breeding Corydoras was still a relatively new concept. I had aquarium gravel as my substrate, and I used undergravel filters, and it worked great. I have, over the years, changed my approach. Many people will say that Corydoras will tear their barbels off their face digging into the substrate. Now, truthfully, I have never seen that, and I have owned probably thousands of Corydoras over the years. I've never observed that. However, I notice a distinct difference with Corydoras if you get, well, my next step after aquarium gravel was river rock with a very wide variety of sizes, so that some was virtually very small pebbles, almost sand, not sand, and some were bigger. And the Corydoras seem to like digging in the sand, the smallest pebbles, more. And I'm telling you, those pebbles were like twice the size of a grain of sand. It just looked like sand. And there were bigger pebbles, and then there's some rather large pebbles. And so these days I strongly prefer sand. Now I buy two kinds. I buy black diamond blasting sand. That's my favorite. They have multiple sizes. I like a medium grade from them. Small grades I find packed down too much, and you get buildup underneath the sand and nitrogen building up, and if you poke into it you see bubbles coming up. That's not good. The medium grades seem to work better. And now with my tanks, depending on what else I have in there, I might have some fairly thick sand, but with Corydoras, this much sand is all you need, and obviously I'm not using an undergravel filter for that. The Corydoras love digging in the sand. I like black. I think most fish pop on black, although a lot of the Corydoras do better on white. So when I want white sand, I get a specific brand of pool filter sand, and I don't like patronizing people because mostly, totally, I don't get paid by anybody, and I don't ask anybody for contributions. But I have tried different kinds of place sand and pool filter sand, and the one I like best is from True Value Hardware Pool Filter Sand. It's white. It's about the same consistency as the Black Diamond medium grain sand, and I think it works very well. With that said, I've been saying it for a long time, and yeah, I'm still tired and dragging too often. I am going to rebuild. I'm down to 3 major tanks, a 50 tall, a 55, and a 125. I've also got a little 20 high that's got no plants, just a little bit of sand and some rocks and some Honduran red point, red points. I'm going to rebuild those 3 larger aquariums, and when I do, one of them is going to be partially aquarium gravel over an under gravel filter. And it's going to have divider, and then the rest is going to be sand, and that tank is going to have Corydoras. I would be shocked if all my tanks didn't have Corydoras. We shall see. Although I'm thinking about doing a goldfish tank. I've actually never done a goldfish tank. Go figure. Of course, there's a lot of fish I haven't had. So somebody asked me about Corydoras that were swimming up and down the glass and the wood and the plants, and not just on the bottom. They're swimming up and down all the time. Well, rest assured, that's perfectly normal. First off, Corydoras have to get to the surface. If you put a wire or a plastic mesh halfway up and they can't get to the surface, they will drown. They have these little converted swim bladders that they go up, gulp a bit of air, and come back down. I have Corydoras in my 50 tall, in my 125. They do fine in fairly deep tanks. But they do swim up and down the glass and so forth, even on the heater. If they do it as a group, that's usually a breeding behavior or pre-breeding behavior. Watch for little white eggs, and typically they're going to lay their eggs on the glass. It's their favorite substance. I have had a few Corys lay them on Amazon sword plants. I had one that laid hers on the heater. They didn't live. I have never had any lay eggs on a rock, although typically I don't have extremely smooth rocks. I don't like jagged ones, but I like rough texture. So, you know, Corydoras going up and down the glass, that's, you know, yeah, they're bottom feeders. Everyone uses them for scavengers. I make sure I have enough food that gets to them. They do like pellets, not as much as some cats. But, I overfeed my top dwellers their flake food, and some gets down to the bottom, and the Corydoras really like that. If I haven't fed my fish for a couple days, which I do now and then, I usually skip 1 day a week, and sometimes I'll skip 2 or 3 days intentionally. Maybe I'm going on a trip, and I just tell my family to leave them alone till I get back. Maybe I just feeling like I need to give them a break. It doesn't hurt the fish, most fish. Some fish can't do that. Gotta know your fish. But if I haven't fed my tank for 2 or 3 days, when I drop some flake food in the top, I have, not all, but I have a couple Corys that will go swim up at the top and swim upside down, like the African upside down catfish. And they'll swim up there eating the flakes off the surface. Weird. I've never seen that until these 2 that I have right now in my 55. Another reason I tend to overfeed my tanks, well, a couple of reasons. One, to get stuff to the Corys. Number 2, I prefer tanks with plants, and I don't usually use much in the way of artificial fertilizer, so my plants need that extra nutrient that overfeeding gets. I don't go crazy with that. That's dangerous. And then, yeah, I guess that's about it. You know, just I like to feed a little too much flake food, and then, like I say, one or 2 days a week I don't feed the fish at all. One thing a lot of people don't realize about Corydoras, I mentioned earlier, they get Corydoras to be bottom feeders and clean up the tanks. First off, Corydoras do not eat fish poop. I've never seen any do it. but they'll eat leftover food quite well. But Corydoras, don't put 1 or 2 in a 10-gallon tank. Get 4 or 5 minimum. I don't like Corydoras in a 10-gallon tank. Why? Because Corydoras are actually a schooling fish in nature. They swim in schools of hundreds, if not thousands. Definitely, I've seen videos in the thousands. I prefer, and I think what I'm going to do when I finally get around to the 125, which will be the last of the tanks I reset, I'm thinking about getting 2 schools of about 30 Corydoras, 2 different species, and put them in there. Most Corydoras will only school with members of their species. Now, that's most. But I'm thinking about doing that. And then probably 2 schools of tetras, 2 different species of tetras up on top. That's it. I want low maintenance. And that's a pretty low maintenance tank, 125. I might put, I'll probably put in a half dozen bristlenose catfish. I like them for the algae. Although I might go with like 30 autocinclus. They're another schooling fish. Bristlenose or not. I don't know. If you get your Corys in a school, they're a lot of fun to watch. They don't really play with each other, but they kind of, like swallows flying in the air, they just tend to move together, although Corys don't stay as together as swallows. It's just fun. Corydoras, because they take that gulp of air every once in a while, they're less fussy about their tank as far as nitrogen, nitrates, nitrites, even ammonia, oxygen. They can survive in water that a lot of fish can't. But the one thing you should realize is the more times they go to the surface, the worse your tank is. They're a good barometer for how good your tank is. So Corydoras are good if you learn to watch them. Of course, if you don't watch your fish at all, I wonder, why do you even have fish? So that people coming in are impressed. Oh, you've got fish. Isn't that precious? Yeah, go away. Don't watch me anymore. I feed some of my fish. Right now I have some farlowellas and bristlenose catfish. I only have 1 Philippine goby left. They like zucchini, spinach, greens that I can get on the bottom, green beans. The bristlenose will eat peas. The others, the farlowella and the goby, you have to take the little shell off the pea. But you have to get them down on the bottom. There's different ways to do that. I like to use these metal stakes they use for gardening. They're almost like shish kebab skewers. And I don't leave the metal in. I just put them down. A few hours later I come back and take it out. Works real nice. Chopsticks, anything with a point that you can just stick it into the sand or gravel, and it'll hold the vegetable at the bottom. Oh, another reason why I overfeed is I always have snails because I like plants. You like plants, you're almost guaranteed to get snails. So I have usually a lot of pond snails or ram's horn, and I also make sure I have some assassin snails. So I got a nice mix of snails. Snails help keep the bottom stirred up, and they help eat all the extra food too. The snails also like the greens. Corydoras tend to ignore that stuff. If you drop in a catfish pellet wafer that sinks to the bottom, Corydoras, they may or may not eat it. They're kind of weird that way. They prefer finer foods. They love digging in the sand. I've seen them stick half their snout under the sand. I mean, right up to their eyes, and it's fun. They'll eat meat just fine, but it's got to be fine. They're not going to eat a dead fish. If they're swimming by, they might pick off a small bit of it, but they're not going to sit there and gorge on it like some fish will. So, you know, like I say, they love flakes that get deep. I've gone off my notes here, so I don't know what else I'm supposed to say. Corydoras, if you have questions, feel free to ask. I'm not the world's foremost expert on Corydoras. I was one of the first in, at least in the Pacific Northwest, to breed Corydoras. As you can see, this doesn't look like the Pacific Northwest, for those who don't know. I am in Wyoming. Yes, I saw the horses running around behind me. I can see them in the window over there, the reflection. We have horses, goats, chickens, dogs, and yeah, we have fish. I'm sitting on our deck, and I just thought I'd sit up here for a change. Like I say, if you have questions about Corydoras, feel free to ask. If you have questions about something else, feel free to ask. I'm never ashamed to say, I don't know. I've said that a lot in my life. Hey, you know what? Just have fun, all right? Bye.